Okay, we're in the last stretch here, so I'm going to introduce our next speaker in this last session. Okay, our next speaker is Hem Pandey, Additional Secretary of the Ministry of the Environment and Forest for the Government of India, who was the host of the CBD COP11. Hailing from Uttarakhand, Mr. Hem Pandey is a 1982 batch Indian Administrative Services Officer, presently working as the Additional Secretary of the Ministry of the Environment and Forest, Government of India. Prior to his present portfolio, he worked as Joint Secretary of the MOEF and handled biodiversity, biosafety, international cooperation, GEF, and animal welfare issues. As national focal point to the Convention of Biological Diversity, Mr. Hem Pandey was responsible for a successful hosting of the 11th Conference of the Parties during the October 9, 2012 meeting in Hyderabad, India. He has served in the state government of West Bengal and Under Secretary to the government. He also worked as additional district magistrate in Darjeeling at a time when agitation for a separate state was at its peak. He was the collector and district magistrate of 2 districts of West Bengal with a population of 12.5 million people. He served as joint secretary in the Union Ministry of Mines, on the board of BALCO, of the Post-Geological Survey of India. He is postgraduate in botany with specialization in ecology and business administration, and he is fond of traveling, trekking, and cricket.
Thank you, Mr. Luck. Good afternoon, distinguished participants. I know we are almost at the closing session, and all of us are looking forward to a wonderful weekend after the deliberations here yesterday and today. I missed yesterday. I was traveling then. It took me about 18 hours to reach from New Delhi to Montreal, and it gives me immense pleasure to be amongst you with this August gathering here for the 3rd meeting of the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity. I extend warm greetings to you all on behalf of the COP presidency, COP Conference of Parties, and India, incidentally, the president of the Conference of Parties to the CBD at the moment, and on my own personal behalf. I do recall with pleasure my participation in the first meeting of the Global Partnership held in December 2011 in Tokyo. The second meeting was organized on the sidelines of the 11th Conference of Parties at Hyderabad in October 2012. The Global Partnership, I guess, is playing an important role in promoting and strengthening national and regional initiatives on business and biodiversity by bringing together stakeholders from across the world. Currently, there are about 7 national or regional initiatives on business and biodiversity, while in other 11 countries, they are under active preparation, including my own country, India. Ladies and gentlemen, why are business and biodiversity initiatives important? I think all of us need to ask this again and again, why business and biodiversity initiative is important. Friends, industry is an important stakeholder in biodiversity, but globally it is so far the least engaged. I quote unquote least engaged, and perhaps also the most difficult to engage. Least engaged and most difficult to engage. And that's where this partnership is trying to fathom these 2 issues. All businesses, regardless of the size, sector, and location, ultimately depend on biodiversity. These are the paradoxes. They also possess biodiversity relevant knowledge, all businesses. And businesses have a direct and indirect impact on biodiversity. Businesses have technical resources, managerial skills to contribute towards conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. How companies manage biodiversity is increasingly seen as relevant to their bottom line performance, I guess. Business is explicitly referred to in the CBD's text. Mr. Brodio might have already told you in Article 10, in Article 16, and in many COP decisions adopted over the years, and in Convention's Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020. It's already there. Many of the Convention's program of work are directly relevant to business. Friends, I reiterate, businesses globally have remained the least engaged stakeholder for sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity. Although all businesses, regardless of size, as I said, sector and location, ultimately are affected by biodiversity. Today, the total revenue of the the largest 500 companies across the world amounts to approximately 40% of the world's GDP. It's 40% of the global GDP. The revenue that largest 500 companies across the world have. Natural capital is the building block for businesses. With such large stakes, businesses must become active partners in biodiversity conservation by incorporating biodiversity management into their operations. Friends, the slogan for 11th Conference of Parties in Hyderabad that we hosted in India was, "Nature protects if she is protected." This befits businesses as well, for businesses benefit when nature is protected. And I would go to one extent further. If businesses are, businesses might say, or we might say, that if business is there, planet will be there. But I think a time has come. If planet is there, businesses will be there. And with this context, I'll just briefly tell what we are doing in India. As I said, this kind of initiative is about to take off in India. We, as Ministry of Environment and Forest, we regulate almost all matters pertaining to biodiversity, pertaining to environment. We regulate in our country. And we organized in association with CBD, Secretariat of Convention on Biological Diversity. In fact, Mr. Sharma and Mr. David were there in Delhi. We had a meeting of industry, government, and CBD, and we organized this initiative. The first round table, it was attended by many companies, national and international organizations, including World Wildlife Fund, IUCN, and you heard IUCN in the morning, and we are again, partnering with them. At the follow-up of the first round table, we had another round of meeting that we had named second round table on business and biodiversity. This was last month on the 5th September. And this was in partnership with GIZ, the German arm on international development. GIZ is in country, in fact Mr. Edgar is here. And this platform we are setting up in one of our industry associations, Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. This platform, first 2 years will be partnered by GIZ. And after that, we think that businesses on its own would be, after this hand-holding of 2 years and pushed by the government, I hope, it will stand on its own feet. This is what we think. And this, the scope of this particular initiative in India is engage and partner with businesses for implementation of CBD goals. And what are the CBD goals? Conservation, sustainable use, and access and benefit sharing of genetic resources. The 3 pillars of the CBD. So, we want to engage and partner with businesses through this initiative. We want to demonstrate and promote business case for biodiversity conservation through this platform. Encourage and help businesses to incorporate biodiversity management plan into their operations, and provide a national forum for dialogue, exchange and learning between and among businesses, governments and NGOs for biodiversity conservation. You heard in the morning, we are again through the CII. We will be having, CII, the Confederation of Indian Industries, hosts every year India Sustainability Summit, and there we are partnering with them on Leader for Nature program in India, IUCN. So in fact, once I go back from here, I'll be participating there on behalf of the government. Now, it sounds very good. We'll have a platform. We'll have, businesses will come forward. But in reality, as I said, engaging businesses on matters pertaining to biodiversity is a challenge. Is quite difficult. And this is what in my last 3 to 4 years when I have been involved in biodiversity management, particularly at the policy level in the ministry. We face quite a few challenges. And if I give you the context, the Indian context, then you will realize how difficult it is. India, I don't know, many of you might not be knowing, it's a very small country if you see the global size. 2.5% of the world's area, only 2.5% of the world's geographical area, but it houses 1/5 of the world's population. Just imagine, 2.5% of the world's area and 1/5 of the world's population. Even, you can't compare China and Brazil with India on that context. Brazil has 3 times the area than India. China has 3 times the area in India. Population-wise, of course, we are at par. And also, we have 1/5 of the world's cattle population. 1/5 of the world's cattle population in that 2.5% of the area. So you can very well imagine the amount of pressure, we call it biotic pressure, on the natural resources of the country, the living natural resources of the country. And still, India is a mega diverse country. That means we have almost 8% of the world's biodiversity, 8% of the world's biodiversity. And area is 2.5% only, mind you, 8% of the world's biodiversity, despite all this pressure. Now, where does industry fit in here? When we have so much of issues regarding land use, so where do we fit industry? Industries come to us, we are the regulator, they come to us, give us the land, because unfortunately in our country, or I think many parts of the world, the dead natural resources, which we call minerals, are also below where we have good forests, where we have tribal people living, and below that are the dead natural resources. The bauxite is there, copper ore is there, iron ore is there, coal is there. We have to take it out without harming the biodiversity. So the pressure on that part of the country is huge. Now, how do we balance? If Ministry of Environment and Forest wants to set up a platform, everybody will rush. They will come and they will say, okay, but it will be a quid pro quo. Okay, we make this platform, and then you give us, this area of the forest, that area of the forest, because everybody is vying for that 2.5% of the area. So it's a huge challenge for us how we balance. And you would be surprised. We have many laws, but 3-4 laws which directly impact industry so far as the environment and biodiversity is concerned. One, we have Wildlife Act, and this is not of today's. The Act is of 1972. We have Forest Conservation Act of 1980. We have Coastal Regulation Zones, the Coastal Regulation Zone Act, and we have Biodiversity Act as well of 2002. All this puts immense, obviously the regulatory procedures are huge, and in spite of all this, whenever a forest land is diverted to the non-forestry purposes, we realize the value of the compensatory afforestation from the companies. And in past, our act came in 1980. Since then, till today, we have almost $7 billion realized from the industry as an offset to the forest land which has gone for the non-forestry purposes. And our procedures are quite rigorous. Now we are finding a way to utilize that money because our judiciary, the courts are also into it. So government alone can't decide how to use that money. That money was basically taken for compensatory afforestation. And you would be glad to know, in India, despite all this pressure, we have been able to increase the forest area over the years. If 1/5 of the country is under forest, some kind of forest area, half of it is not good in quality. So we have to improve that, and half of it is quite good. In fact, those of you who have been to India, those of you who might have seen our national parks and sanctuaries, those are amazingly beautiful, almost pristine, natural area. You can see nature at its best out there, despite the kind of biotic pressure we have. In order to, this is the Ministry of Environment and Forest. Now we have another ministry, Ministry of Corporate Affairs. What they have done recently, realizing the importance of course, it's a corporate social responsibility that they administer. And on that, we have a law in place now. We all talk, but we have a law in place now. And what does that law say? That 2% of the profits of a company must go to CSR. Earlier it was voluntary. Now by law, you will have to put 2% into that. And I would urge, the Executive Secretary is here of the CBD. I think all the parties who are here and who will be there. I think the next COP12 should take a decision, should encourage all the parties to have a law of this kind in place, so that 2% of and there are there are segregations. It's not that a company formed tomorrow will also have to put in 2%. There are segregations. Initially we are targeting big ones, and gradually I think all will come in the fold. So this is an important piece of legislation which India, despite such a growth and development imperative. We are, mind you, we are a developing country. Half of our population does not have access to energy. Come evening it's all dark. They don't have access to energy. We talk of energy efficiency. We do not have access to energy, and so on and so forth. In spite of this, we have passed a law in our parliament where 2%, it is mandatory now to a select group of companies, obviously the big companies, to put in 2% of CSR exclusive. It's not voluntary now, you have to do it. And we were calculating in our last meeting with businesses, as I said, the initiative that we have set up. We thought that even 1% of that, if it goes into the biodiversity matters, that also would be around $25 to $30 million. We have calculated an amount which would be around $3 to $4 billion. We will get every year as CSR, and out of that, 1% of that, if it comes to biodiversity matters, I think it will be. So we are devising rules. Our company of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they are trying to devise rules for this, and I hope we will be because it's in our interest that we conserve biodiversity, we use it sustainably, and we ensure that access and benefit sharing takes place. Benefit sharing by those who are making some money out of the natural resources that they are using. So this is the initiative, and I would like an important takeaway from this third conference. If next COP can take a view on this particular aspect, that each party, each country, 193 countries are today members of the CBD. If we take this as a law in our respective countries, I think it will go a long way in setting up a platform that would encourage companies to conserve, sustainably use, because non-use of natural resources, I guess, also is not desirable. One needs to use it, but use it sustainably. Now, sustainable word, I think many of you, sometimes we use it, we very often use it, but in this word, I don't know, when 20% of us use 80% of the world's resources, so what kind of sustainable world we are talking about, that also has to be seen. 20% of us globally use 80% of the world's resources, natural resources. So it's a misnomer. So I think we have to either design some new word, wiser use or intelligent use or some use, but sustainable word also has, I think, lived its, I would say, outlived its, otherwise, and the consumption patterns and all those, it sounds good, but practicing it is very difficult. And in India, we are facing a country which has to grow, which has to develop, and at the same time preserve environment. It's two good things, protection of environment and developing. Two good things. It's not one-off. It's not okay, we'll develop later, first we protect environment, or vice versa. It's not that for a country like India. So still, we have a CSR 2%. So I would, with this, I would end here because already I think I've taken more than my allotted time. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey, for those remarks, and especially highlighting some ideas for what could go into recommendations for COP12 parties to discuss in terms of business and biodiversity issues. Now, we will have breakout sessions later on discussing some of the ideas and recommendations. But before we do, I just wanted to give a broad overview of a number of issues which are going to be discussed from now until COP12, which has implications on businesses. And so, though they are not within the business and biodiversity arena in a narrow sense, but it has a lot of implications on how businesses will respond. We can figure it out how to change this. We know that the reason, there are sort of two specific reasons why the engagement of businesses is considered very important by the parties. One is, of course, to minimize the damage caused by business operations on biodiversity, which, as we've heard, is immense. And second is also to look at opportunities of using private capital in biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. And this falls under the whole rubric of resource mobilization efforts, which is being discussed within the CBD. And as you know, that there were some very specific targets which were established in COP11, which binds the parties now to start looking at the resource mobilization in terms of reporting on the current expenditures which countries have on biodiversity and relevant issues, and also to start looking at what kind of financial plans they can develop on increasing resource mobilization. And that, of course, most of the countries are looking at opportunities for mobilizing private capital there. Now, in that context, there is also a discussion on how much resources are actually needed. And there has been one exercise which was completed by a high-level panel which was established, which submitted its first findings at COP11, and the decision was taken to continue that, to refine this assessment further, and this is continuing now with a much more broader based and regionally representative panel, which will again now submit its first draft at the WIGRI meeting in June, and then the final one at COP12 in South Korea. And one of the elements it's looking at is not only looking at the cost of conservation and achieving the Aichi targets, but also looking at what the benefits of these investments would be. So the focus is now on financial investments in biodiversity conservation and the benefits arising out of it in terms of economic benefits as well as social benefits. So this is an important element for business engagement, because it puts the whole argument more in economic terms now. There was also an agreement on the broad framework on how countries are going to report on these expenditures. And if you look at this reporting framework, it not only lists on the reporting on expenditures through international flows, which would include ODA, but also domestic expenditure, but also within domestic expenditures also divides on how much businesses are investing in biodiversity and how much other social sectors are investing. And at the moment we have about 45 parties who submitted their reports already, which was reported in COP11. And we expect, as the target has been established, that 75% of the parties report these expenditures by 2015. So we, as a Secretariat, are making as much effort as possible to build capacities and have discussions within parties so that this can be expedited further. Related to that is also some parallel activities which are happening, which is looking at how do you provide value to biodiversity, and which can be incorporated in more monetary terms. But recognizing also that there are certain values which cannot be monetized, but they are very important socially and culturally, but that also has to be recognized. So there is a work which is done under TEED and other initiatives which is ongoing, which again would give much more policy support for businesses to engage in this issue. And lastly, I'd like to mention is that we jointly with a number of governments, including specifically Ecuador, Sweden, India, Japan, Norway, and European Commission are going to hold another informal dialogue before the political decision making happens in WIGRI and COP to bring some of these key parties together with other stakeholders, including businesses, in a much more informal setting, and to look at the possibilities of how consensus can be arrived in some of the more sort of controversial issues. And specifically, as I mentioned yesterday, one of the key issues here would be what are called in CBD terms the innovative financial mechanism, which we've heard a lot about, whether it's payment for ecosystem services or biodiversity offsets, whether agreements could be reached on this, considering the issues of rights of indigenous and local people and the safeguard mechanism which can be brought in. And this, similar to the agreement we have reached in the Nagoya Protocol, I think would give a framework for businesses to operate with rules and regulations in these areas and open up a bigger investment opportunity for businesses to engage in. And hopefully it will also give fillip to the reform which is required specifically in terms of subsidies, and whether some of the existing subsidies which have harmful effect on biodiversity can be reformed to have more positive impact on biodiversity. So these are the sort of broad areas in which a number of discussions will take place from now until COP12. And as Braulio would also talk in the closing session today, that from the Secretariat side, the effort is to engage in all these discussions a much wider stakeholder group. And businesses especially, we're trying to engage as much as possible so they have a good engagement with the government and policy makers before these decisions come in the intergovernmental process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ravi. So, good news is this is almost over. We're close. We have one more task that we actually want to do to end today. You've heard a great deal of information, and there's been a great deal of case studies and different perspectives given. But we want to bring this forward to the next COP, and we want to get your help to do that. So what we're going to be doing for the next 30 minutes approximately is going to be breaking out into 4 sessions and just informal discussions, and we have one key question. What are the key decisions, the 3 key decisions that you would like to see brought forward to COP12 in terms of business engagement? Okay, based on what you've heard, based on maybe things that have not been discussed but you think are important, what are the 3 key decisions? We're going to split the room up. One group is going to be in this side of the room with myself. One group will be over there with Elisa Romano. Elisa, if you can just stand up, please. Great. And we're going to have 2 rooms at the back where the other sessions were, one with Mr. Nacker, Kervin Nacker, and one with John Carty. Okay? So if you can please divide up into 4 groups, just randomly split up, and we'll try to do this in about 30 minutes, reconvene, and then we'll have a final closing session. Okay? So thanks very much. So the 2 rooms are back there, and 2 sides of this room here. Thank you.